This is the Authority Company Podcast, conversations with leaders who are building the future. Hola, I'm Joe Pardavila, and today I'm sitting down with executive communication coach and author Cathy Bonczek to talk about her new book, The Simple Magic of Executive Communication. Forget perfection. Communication that changes everything begins with connection. Drawing from decades coaching leaders in finance, private equity, and Fortune 500 companies, Cathy's going to break down why the most powerful communicators stop performing, start connecting, and learn how to make people feel seen, heard, and understood. Cathy, welcome to the show. How are you?
Joe, I'm good. It's good to be here. Thank you.
You're very welcome, and I'm happy you're here because I'm a big communication nerd. It's what I do, helping people be better at being human and connecting with other people. And in the book, you talk about the idea of people using the excuse of perfection to connect. Like they're too busy trying to be perfect with their messaging, and we're speaking obviously from the leadership level. But tell me about this idea, because you would think leaders, they've been through the MBA programs or business schools where they know that, was perfection is the enemy of good and all that jazz. Why don't they ever take, like, I always say a lot of people don't eat what they, don't eat they make, or, that cliche of like, bake what you eat kind of thing. But like, why don't leaders suppose that when it comes to communication, if they know perfection is the enemy of good in business, why do they have so much trouble with the communication part of it?
It's funny. I don't think of they use it as an excuse, but I think it's just baked into us as humans, and that we want to show up and we want to be brilliant. And if you happen to, many of the people I work with, these leaders have been exceptional in their prior lives, either exceptional students, maybe exceptional athletes. And so it stands to reason to me that when they get into the field of play, which is business, they want to show up and be the best. And that gets rewarded, and that gets, people practice for that. And so to me, it makes a lot of sense why we do it. However, it gets in the way because then you're in the seeking of that perfection, and I've got to get the A plus. I've got to do the my boss is going to see me present, and I have to look like I know everything. Then we get ourselves sort of tied into knots where people like people. We like flawed people. We like people who are not perfect, because I always say we don't trust the perfect people because we think they're too good to be true. But then we still put that pressure on ourselves. And I know I've fallen victim to this. I'm sure you have too, and that you really want something to be the best it could be. And you worry about that more than just saying it's more important I show up. And you can rehearse to be pretty darn good and to be able to get your message to land. But if you sacrifice that need for it to be perfectly landing, then you're better off, I think.
And in terms of these leaders, it's funny because the idea of being perfect is, you think about all these things, whether it's performative or not. But then there are also leaders in a world where they're under a giant microscope. If Steve Jobs was around, there'd be Substacks written about him flipping tables, or there'd be like subtweets about which boss to flip the table in Cupertino today. He didn't have that. And so now these leaders are literally being, you're live tweeting an event. Like, your career as a leader is being live tweeted, whether it's through social media, whether it's through a Substack, whether it's through a TikTok video. So there's that layer on top of it as well. The fact that whatever they do, talk about the perfection piece of being the perfect, leader performatively, but then also in a world where everything is going to be micro analyzed. How much harder does that make it for leaders to become better communicators when they have that layer to worry about as well?
Oh, I think it's immensely hard, but you can't carry that with you into every conversation. And I liken it to when people get on stage for the first time and suddenly there's all those eyes, or someone puts a microphone in front of you, and I'm sure you've seen this. Microphones make people crazy,
Yeah.
as do cameras, and that whole, because it's the permanency of it. And so that whatever you do, if it's flawed in particular, it's going to be there forever. And so I think I always say to my leaders, you can't think about that. But when you get to that point, just stop thinking about yourself. Take the attention off yourself and focus on your audience. And when you're busy saying, "Hey, did that make sense to you? And was this a good point? And what should we go? Where should we go from here?" Then you're losing some of that anxiety about it's going to be seen forever, because you're just back to the human element of connection.
And, one of the things I've noticed from just dealing in business media is the fact that a lot of times leaders are babied and they're placed in bubble wrap and protected. And I have this running joke, Cathy, where I say, never interview a baby or a CEO because neither have anything to say. because they're so scared of the things we've been talking about. How harmful is that as well? Like babying the leader and putting them keeping them in safe rooms. We always talk about snowflakes as usually children, but man, there's a lot of adults that are snowflakes too. So tell me about that, like the idea of the team around you, shielding you and protecting you so much where it actually becomes harmful.
I have to say, I don't see my clients as being babied, but I
Okay.
do see some of them as being perhaps intimidating and with the same effect. And
Okay.
so it's not that people are trying to protect them, it's that people may not feel that they can correct them or that it might be perhaps career limiting to say to your boss that wasn't your best work.
Right.
And so they don't get the feedback that they need all the time. But I think the motivations might be slightly different. I don't think of them as being babied or pampered, but I think of them as being so good that people say, I can't possibly correct them, or feeling that maybe it's not really acceptable to manage up.
Mm. In a way, they're being baby because it's almost like nowadays when the baby's crying, you give him an iPad. In this in this adult way, you're like, okay, I'm not going to say anything because it is what it is. I'm not going to change what he's doing. So that's why they come to work with somebody like you
Yeah.
because you're going to give the unvarnished truth, right?
Yes, absolutely. And I think it's refreshing to many of my clients. They really want the feedback. And they're not asking for this other, whatever the reaction is. They want feedback because they want to get better and they're usually the ones who work harder at it because they've gotten to where they are by that work ethic or by that excellence or that what's driven them to be really good at what they do. So they want to get better. And so feedback is the mechanism.
Yeah, and the pandemic gave us a lot of words that we've hung on to and got tired of hearing, like pivot and organic and teamwork and all these things. One of them was authenticity, and
Mm,
you talk about a lot about authenticity.
I do.
And again, it's something. I always joke like it took a global pandemic for leaders to learn about empathy. Like, oh, it took that to learn about empathy. Another one of those words. But tell me about this authenticity piece because there is that fine line of being authentic and oversharing. How do you
Yeah.
guide these leaders through that?
Well, it's funny. I don't think we have an epidemic of oversharing in the business world.
Right, true,
I
true.
see it elsewhere. But what I do, I think it's funny. It's the one word I will not get tired of is authenticity, because for me, that's the end goal. Is that it's almost an act of bravery to show up and to deliver your messages and be yourself. And people sometimes when I say here are some skills or here are some things you should do to flex to people's styles, I was at just yesterday. Someone said, "Isn't that acting, Kathy?" And I said, "No," and I have the skills of an actress. I was trained as an actress, and I love those skills, and they've served me well in my business life. But the idea is to use them as tools to then be yourself and show up. And so I have an authentically strong voice. I have an authentically soft voice. I have all the range in between that. But you have to maybe experiment a little to find that. So for me, the authenticity is it's not about oversharing, but it's about making sure it's you who's in the room. Because I can hear in a voice when someone is presenting with the presenter voice. I'm like, ooh, I don't trust you.
That's funny. Yeah, it also reminds me of the fact that, one of the things I always tell people is there's the line from the movie Spinal Tap where Nigel Tufnell's giving a tour of his studio, and he says, "This is my amp," and it goes to 11. And it's a funny joke of like, why not just make the highest 10? But he goes, no, this one goes to 11. And I always tell people when you're performing or being in front of a crowd doing a podcast, tune yourself up to an 11. It doesn't mean that you're blowing out your speaker. You're just yourself, just one higher a little bit because that's the thing people don't think about. And like you say about acting, is like, no, you're not acting, but you're also thinking about, oh, I need to enunciate. I can't mumble. I can't rush through my words. It's like there is a performative aspect to it that you need to crank up to 11. Otherwise, first of all, you're going to look dumb. You're not going to come across as a confident leader. But at the end of the day, there is a level of performativeness to being a leader.
Yes, because I think what we want from our leaders is we want to be inspired. We want to have a reason to care about what they care about and to follow them into battle, as I always say. And to do that, you need to care. You need to have emotion. You need to show emotion. But you can't fake that. You can't get up there and say, "I care deeply about it," and not care because we'll know. Audiences
Yeah.
are smart.
Absolutely. And you talk a lot about executive presence. What do people misunderstand about executive presence? Because I think people automatically assume executive presence means, it looks good in a suit or she looks good in red, or, all the silly things we talk about, all the accoutrement and the bells and whistles we add to what a leader's supposed to look like. But tell me about executive presence and what people get wrong about that.
I would say if anyone gets anything wrong about executive presence, it's probably that it's so nuanced because executive presence is defined by every individual you meet. And so something that could be charismatic and strong in one audience for one audience could be too much and overdone for another. And so the really good communicator is always assessing who's listening to my message, who am I dealing with? And there's that, I think it's a generosity. I like to call it an artistry. Like you're painting with different colors, you're using all the tools, but it's also a generosity of, what do you need from me?
Interesting. And a lot of people believe that these communicators you're talking about are born that way, but that you push back severely and you say you don't believe in that at all.
No,
So
no.
what actually creates that great leader who maybe wasn't quote unquote born that way?
In terms of their presence is what you're
Yeah.
saying.
Yeah.
I think it's someone who really is aware. I always say communication is as much about observation as it is about what you're saying to someone. And so a really good leader is observing how the impact is landing on the people that he or she is interacting with. They look at what the situation is and what it requires. And so there's this sort of ability to adapt that I think lets people grow into it. And then you have to practice these things. Like whenever people meet with me, I'm saying, look, you're going to do some exaggerated, crazy things with me. This is not how I want you to present when you go back to your workplace. But you need to stretch your muscles. You need to try these things on, and then you can play with them and find out how to flex in different situations.
Mm. There's this great story in the book, Kathy, about you talk about someone be calling you too nice at work.
Mm.
And it's funny because this gets into the idea of perceptions. People perceived you as being too nice. So how tell me about that in terms of leaders and how they can either misshapen perception, improve perception. It's obviously important because for most of these leaders, they're not going to spend, you know, 5 to 6 hours a day with their people. They're usually cocooned up in an office, see very few people outside of that. So the perception becomes reality in many instances. How do they improve that perception without having to literally go face to face with every employee on the floor?
Well, this is why every interaction matters. And so when I tell that story all the time because this manager came to me and said, "You're just too nice." And I very nicely said, "What do you mean?" So I instead of saying what I should have said, which was, "You're an idiot and you've missed the point. And I'm a brilliant leader and I've done this and here are all the metrics and don't tell me I'm too nice because you're missing the point that I'm an effective leader." But I didn't have that voice at that time. I hadn't done what I've been doing now for years. And so I just basically took it on the chin and eventually left the bank because I felt completely unseen and unappreciated. And so it was my job, actually, in hindsight, it was my job to tell this manager what I was about and in ways that he could hear me. I was waiting to be noticed. I was waiting for it to be evident. I was communicating in the way that I'd always communicated. It wasn't his style, and it wasn't a way that he could take in the information.
And so what is it in your case, you had to leave. Looking back,
No, if looking back, if I'd known then what I know now,
yeah,
I would still be a banker. I
okay,
would
but what would you
I probably would have stayed. I might have convinced him that I was good. I would at least have fought for it. Usually in the fighting for it, I probably would have earned his respect because he didn't have the words. It was really bad feedback.
yeah.
And he didn't have the words. Had he had the words, he was basically trying to tell me that nice was weak. And he wasn't seeing, the mirror of his strength in my style, even though I was a very strong person and I was a wonderful leader at that time. And the team loved me and appreciated me, it was completely lost on him.
So that was a mistake you were making in terms of perceptions, but in terms of regular day to day, what communication mistake quietly kills careers even for super talented people? Like we know they're A plus, but for whatever reason, this communication aspect is below them. They don't think it's important or they don't realize it's important. Is there a common one that leaders are making that's destroying their careers?
No, I think that's a bit, I can't think of one thing that would destroy a career. But the one thing that I do see as a pattern is it takes people a little time to ramp up their speaking out voice. And so I spend a lot of time with people who are, growing in their careers and I spend a lot of time on saying your voice matters. If you're in the room, you're there by invitation, you speak up. You say something and you allow yourself to say something wrong. Don't put on yourself this, I have to say something brilliant every time I'm in the because it's your voice, just the quality of it in the room matters. And so that's the mistake I'm always trying to fix for is the quiet ones.
Oh, okay, good. And you write about rehearsing to converse instead of
Mm.
rehearsing to sound polished. First of all, break that down. What does that mean? Rehearsing this to converse instead of sound polished. Break those two down and what's happening there.
Okay. So let me do the rehearsing to be polished because the one we
Okay.
don't like first. The rehearsing to be polished is somebody who says, I've got a script and I'm going to rehearse, I'm going to memorize it. And every time I get up, it's going to come out in this word order, in this particular way, with this intonation. I have my periods marked, my commas marked. And what you get is a perfectly delivered script, but you often lose the intonation of reality, you lose the authenticity. And if one word gets said wrong, you might throw the whole thing off. And I've seen this happen where I'm
Oh yeah.
supposed to say his, I said her. Oh my God, I don't know what to do. And the recovery is harder. Then to me, that's, and everybody has a different way they rehearse. I don't want to bash those who write scripts because scripts can be very useful. But I would say you write a script so you know what your message is. And then you rehearse from it, but then you play with it a little bit and you don't write the script out as your notes. You might write a word or two or a phrase or two that you want to replicate. But the whole thing is it has to sound as if you're just saying, "Hey, Joe, let's go get a sandwich. I have something to tell you." As opposed to, "And now, Joe, I'm going to tell you what's on the menu today," which is just not how we speak in reality. And so, when people say to me, "I rehearse and I sound mechanical and I don't rehearse as a result," I'm like, "You're rehearsing badly." And so my rehearsal is always just boil it down. Give me the one sentence version first. Give me the bottom line message. What has to be said? Okay, now we riff from there. That's the one thing you have to say. The rest is add on and don't add too much on. I don't need the entire encyclopedia. I just need the main message or the main letter.
That's good. It reminds me of a story, and I bring this up when it comes to I consult and produce podcasts from our
Yes.
day to day, Kathy, and I had this client who really wanted to speak to this former CEO of a large Fortune 500 company. She was now a board member, and I go, okay, great. So I set it up, and the one requirement that this guest had was she had to have all the questions in advance of the
Mhm.
podcast. I'm like,
Yes.
okay, which just so you know, Kathy, I do not like to do it all. And if it was my podcast, I was like, "No, we don't do that. Here's a few of the topics we're gonna discuss because it
Yes.
does fall into that mechanical rehearse thing. So what this person proceeded to do was, I'm not sure if she did it or her team did it, proceeded to write out the answers for each question, and when the host went to ask the questions on the podcast that was being recorded live to tape, they were reading the answers.
Oh my goodness.
And Kathy, as you can tell, that did not go over well. It was
Yes.
pretty terrible. But again, going back to my earlier statement about babying leaders, which you pushed back on, this is a case
I see it
where
as an experiential value for you.
yes. So this is where I come from of like, oh, okay.
Yes.
She did not feel safe doing a podcast unless she had the answers in advance, the answers to the test in advance. And it was remarkably bad. And I use that example all the time. So when people ask, hey, can I have the questions? Like, don't want to give you all the questions, but here's a few. So how do you get leaders in this case, like a leader that's maybe a little afraid of saying something wrong? Going back to my old joke of like never talk to an interview of a
Yes.
CEO or a baby because I have nothing to say. What do you get them? How do you get them comfortable to be able to take questions, to maybe pivot, to change the subject? How do you prepare them for things that they are not going to be prepared for? Because in most cases, my case is an outlier. In most, 9 out of 10 media outlets will not give a person the question in advance unless it's a super friendly place. Tell me how you prepare someone for that so they don't come across mechanical, rehearsing all the stuff we've been talking about.
Well, what first thing I would do is I always start where somebody is. So if someone comes to me with that written answer, I'm like, "Just read it to me." And I let them read it. So I was like, "Okay, now I understand what's important for you. Now just put the script away. Tell me again what you just said." And I make them say it without the writing in front of them. And I'll do that a couple of times and I'll say, "Now, can you give it to me in half the words?" And I get it down to a little bit shorter. And then I play with them in this way so that they start to know, like, I know the answer. And then I give them candid feedback about, when you read that to me, I didn't trust you. And the impression was of somebody who's very uncertain. So when you're just talking to me, wow, there's all the wisdom you have and all of your credibility. So we want that. And when they realize the impact it has and they get that sort of they can see themselves through my eyes, that helps them. And so there's an iterative process, and some people get there slower and some people get there faster. And then there's always a way. People say, "Oh, so you want me not to have any notes?" And I'm like, "I don't want you reading from a teleprompter unless you have taken many classes in reading from a teleprompter, because that's a skill and it requires a lot of finesse. But if you're on a stage and you need a note or two, you can have a couple of words in big font, either on the podium that you're not going to use, that's over there on the side of the stage. You can walk to it, glance at it, and come back to center stage. Or you can look at a confidence monitor, but you cannot write it out because no one can read that fast and then engage with an audience."
There is an epidemic, and I don't know if you agree with me on this, Kathy, that people are too slideshow addicted nowadays. Whenever you go to a webinar or even like a talk with someone, it's very slideshow heavy. And a lot of times, especially if it's a virtual one, as you know, a lot of these platforms, it's mostly like giant slide deck and then the tiny
Little
head of the person
tiny
there.
yeah.
It drives me crazy, and I know for many people it is a crutch because they're like, "Okay, cool. I don't have to be so performative because there's this big goofy PowerPoint slide that's gonna say everything I'm saying," which
Right.
again, there's redundancy there. What's your take on sliders? Because I know they can be very useful, especially if you're illustrating a point, you're talking about a certain subject, you wanna throw something on there to so people have like a picture representation of what you're talking about. But man, this is becoming an epidemic, and I feel like we can't get away from it now. Like, I've had conversations with people like, "Oh, I want you to meet with this client." I'm like, "Cool." I'm like, "Do you have a deck?" I'm like, "No, I'm just gonna talk to the person." So
Yeah.
tell me about this.
Well, I agree with you that they're everywhere and that we lose the focus on the person when we use them. But you have to consider that in many of the situations where I'm coaching people, there's maybe an annual meeting requirement that there be some documentation of what they're talking about. And so it's a dual purpose, and that people want to have it for later. And so they create these decks so that people can understand what you're saying as they're saying it and then
Yeah.
walk away with it later. And so they have sort of a place in our lives that I don't think we're going to get rid of. And so then the idea becomes, how do you become the focal point, not the page? And I was saying this just to someone, I'll show you a piece of paper here. I was saying to someone, he said, "Well, what if I give a pitch book out and everyone's flipping ahead and I'm losing attention?" And I'm like, "That's the peril, in that you give it at the
Yeah.
beginning of the meeting and you've got this distraction built in." I said, "So one point is you could say to them, 'I'll give it to you at the end of the conversation.' You'll probably annoy 25% of the people in the room because there's one quarter of the room who needs the pitch book in their hands.
Sure.
And you can run that risk, or you can be a little bit of what I call the school teacher and saying, 'We're all on page 15. I'm going to wait until you're all on page 15.' And if you do that gracefully, you could get away with it. The other thing is to have your own pitch book and to present like this. Like you have, like, just hold it, you're on a desk, or, just by you and say,
Your hand.
'So here, as you can see here,' because what I can then do is I can use the power of my eye contact and my vocal contact. This person, even if they're looking at the pitch book, they know I'm talking to them. They will lift their head and engage with me. And then I'll turn to the next person and say, "And you might notice over here in the second paragraph," and they know that they're getting the benefit of my energy. And so what I'm doing is allowing myself still to be the spotlight person because I'm trying to create a relationship with them.
Yeah, that's good. And one of my pet peeves with slides is when the slide becomes like a spreadsheet and there's like numbers, and then like you'll see that like it'll literally be like the numbers in like 10-point font, and you're like,
I've
if you
seen those.
as you can see here, I'm like, no, I cannot. I can't see that.
Right.
What do you suggest should be just give us a quick little like what Kathy thinks. What should be if you were going to use a slide, what should be on that slide?
Well, it should be like 50% white space. If you start with that premise that the
Okay.
eye can't take it all in. So you try to make it as simple as possible so the eye can see the main image. So like no
Okay.
four charts, make it one chart and flip to four pages.
Okay.
And big, as you're saying, the big font. And if sometimes you just put something up and you say, "I know you can't read it, but I wanted to show you just how many, the companies we have in our portfolio." That's a different message. It's
Sure.
not meant to be a line by line read. So the first thing you need to do is tell people, "This is here to show you X, Y, and Z." And so the density might be part of the message. If you want them to know the different portfolio companies, make them readable, put a few on a page and flip more pages. Because everyone shies away from that because they want to save the page number. I want the attention on the piece of information. You need to use directional language because you don't just put up a slide. No one just rivets to the, they don't go right to the left. They go wherever they want to go.
Right.
So then you have to say, "Let's start on that left-hand column." And what you'll notice is this. Or you might notice I've circled something over here on the bottom right, but they won't notice it unless you tell them to look there. So you have to combine your directional language as the presenter of the slide, keep it as free from busyness as you possibly can, and make sure it actually has a message.
Excellent. Good stuff. All right. So you've coached executives through TED Talks, media appearances,
Mm.
high stake meetings. What separates the people who command a room from the people who just fill that time? Because again, there have been thousands of TED Talks. I know there have been TEDx Talks, which is even double, triple what TED Talks are. But there's some that are amazing and they're all equally good, but some are just much better than the others. What separates the good from the great when it comes to people that are publicly speaking these days?
I think it's the heart. I think it's when they connect their feelings to what they're saying and their beliefs, and there's something you can feel it almost, and you hear it in the change of the voice. And when someone really is telling you their truth, you can't not listen to it, and you can't not be moved by it. And I do believe that in business, we've always been trained away from that. We have to be neutral, we have to be efficient, we have to be doing, and I'm like, "Oh, no, no, we have to be feeling and caring and exciting or sad." I mean, all of those things have a place. That's what makes something a story and not just a lot of information.
That's great. And speaking of I want to double click on that, like first impressions. What do you think people can sense within the first 30 seconds of someone speaking? Yeah, obviously the heart part you mentioned, but what else is there something that jumps out that makes a really good first impression, whether it is a TED talk or a media engagement or maybe just you're talking to the board. Is there something out there that you think that's something that people should really focus on when they're opening up a conversation or monologue?
Yes, I think it's comfort, which translates into confidence.
Mm,
And so I often say to my clients, a day before you're presenting on the big stage, go stand on the stage in the empty room. Just stand on the stage so you know what it feels like to be looking that way. And then if you can get the benefit of a dress rehearsal, so you find out if there's lights and other things that are going to be in your viewpoint, all the better. And then I often say rehearse. I always say the bookends, your beginning and your end. The two worst moments of any presentation, they get,
right.
"Hello, I'm Kathy," and then, "I'm done now." And if you have those anchors, then you can start strong and with confidence, and then audiences, they're always rooting for you. That's the secret. Audiences want you to be engaging. They want you to do well. And then if you start to be uncomfortable, so do they. And so that coming in with that semblance of, because you can fake it until you make it. You can come in and have the semblance of confidence and then start to say, "Okay, this is going well. Now I'm really confident." And I think that's a really a helpful thing for people in those first 30 seconds.
That's awesome. All right. So if someone is listening or watching now and they feel invisible at meetings, overlooked in their career, sort of like you were in that banking job, terrified of speaking up, what's the very first shift you want them to make tomorrow?
It's probably what they're saying to themselves in their head, because I find that that's usually the enemy of getting into the room is, "Oh, what I have to say isn't important," or "I can't say it perfectly, therefore I'm not going to say it." And so I always say the minute you start talking to yourself as if you're talking to a very dear friend, you're in a really good place, because we're very hard on ourselves. We say things to ourselves that we would never say out loud to a friend or a colleague. And yet, like, "Oh, that was terrible. Oh, you don't deserve to be in the room." Like, you would never say that out loud. And yet we do that to ourselves. And so I would say to those who are learning to find their voice, you start by saying, "Doesn't matter what I say, it's important I say something, because I was invited to be here, and I want everybody in the room to know I was here and I'm paying attention." And I teach people that the very first thing you could do is just say, "Joe, I love what you just said." Like, that's a way of speaking in a meeting. You don't have to say, I don't have to add anything, but just like, "Yes, what Joe said is great. Let's all listen to him," is a wonderful way to add something to a meeting.
Oh, that's great. It's funny, people are so afraid of sharing their browser history, but like you mentioned, your inner thoughts, man, if you could share that, he'll be like, "What's wrong with you?" I don't care I don't care what websites you've been on, but
Yes.
why do you say that to yourself? And
Yes.
we
Why
do it
are you
all to
being so
ourselves,
mean? Yes,
right?
absolutely. Absolutely.
Awesome. She is Cathy Bonczek. The book, The Simple Magic of Executive Communication. Forget perfection. Communication that changes everything begins with connection. Cathy, thanks so much for your time. I really appreciate it.
Joe, this has been fun. Thank you.
And that's going to do it for this episode. If you want to find out more about Cathy and our other amazing authors, go to theauthoritycompany.com.